Alright, so during Apple's June WWDC, they announced iOS 15. And during that iOS 15 segment of the presentation, they showed off several new changes to the FaceTime app, including noise isolation, which allows you to actually isolate noise from around your house if you have a very noisy house while you're on a FaceTime call, and it will only focus on the audio coming from you, which is pretty cool. And they also announced portrait mode, which is basically like portrait mode when taking a photo on an iOS device. It'll focus on you and blur out the background. So they now add this to FaceTime, so anyone your FaceTime call can just kind of focus on you a little bit more and the background isn't so distracting. But what really caught my eye the most is web browser support for FaceTime. So what that means is you can now copy a link to your FaceTime session and send it to other people who want to join in. And the thing that was really the most interesting is it's not just iOS devices or iPadOS devices or even macOS devices that can join in, but they now have added support for Android devices and Windows laptops that can all join your FaceTime session via a link that you can send them, which is really cool. Of course, there's no native app to this. They just have to open a web browser, paste the link in, and they're in. But I think it's pretty cool that they now have added support for that, and FaceTime is no longer exclusive to the Apple ecosystem. Apple also announced SharePlay, which basically allows you to take, let's say, a movie from HBO, and you can actually stream it while on a FaceTime session. So people in your FaceTime session can see what you're watching. You can display it on your Apple TV if you want to watch from there, and it's kind of playing for everyone. Everyone's getting that same audio while in that FaceTime session. Everyone can watch all together. It can be a TV show, movie, whatever. Apple's published an API for it, so many apps like HBO, Hulu, Twitch, anything like that can take advantage of this great new feature and just allow people to really connect while watching TV or watching movies while on FaceTime. Also part of iOS 15, Apple introduced focus features, which allows you to stay on track with your work and not get distracted by things on your iPhone. As part of this, they introduced a notification summary, which basically allows all your notifications to be delivered in one big group at a set time, rather than having them all come in one by one while you're trying to get work done. Personally, I'm really glad they finally did this. I've been waiting for something like this for a very long time, and I'm glad they finally carried through, and you no longer kind of have to skim through an endless long list of notifications. Instead, it's all grouped and even formatted based on what you use more and what you use less. Another thing Apple introduced as part of the focus features section are focus settings, which basically allows you to set a focus on your phone. For example, let's say you're at work, you could set a focus to be doing work so that you'll only get notifications of work-related things, and your phone won't try to distract you with maybe a notification from a game or friends or something like that when you would want to see those in a more social setting, such as when you're at home, which you can do the exact same thing with, and set it as you're at home, you're with friends, whatever. You'll get notifications relating to that activity. So it's pretty cool. You can now tell iOS 15 what you're going to be doing, and it'll schedule your notifications. It'll kind of just sift everything out and give you what you need during that time, and you're no longer just going to be distracted by things that you don't need to see or that will make you get off track. Finally, in iOS 15, Apple introduced live text, which basically allows you to use your phone's camera to scan things around you in real life and interact with the text on them. So for example, let's say you have a whiteboard in front of you. You want to take a picture as a whiteboard, but you just want the words written on it rather than the entire whiteboard itself. You can use live text to scan the whiteboard and it will just pick up the text and take a picture of it rather than the entire whiteboard. You can also do this with phone numbers on buildings, believe it or not. You can actually scan the phone number. Let's say the phone number is on the outside wall of a building, and not only will it recognize the phone number, but it will allow you to call it just by tapping on the phone number in the image, which is pretty cool. However, that may seem a bit familiar, and that's because it's pretty much just taken straight from Google Lens, which has existed since October 2017. Google Lens has been available on many Android phones, and you can actually download it on iOS, and does many of the same things, although, knowing Apple, I'm sure their version of it is going to be a lot more refined and a lot better, because as we all know, Apple tends to come to these kinds of things late, but does it better than everyone else. So every year, the new iPadOS always just seems to be a bunch of features that iOS got the previous year, and this year is no different. iPads are finally getting widgets and the app library. So you can now add a weather widget, a reminder widget, and you can easily access all your apps from the app library, and you can even hide pages just like you can do in iOS. So none of this is new. iOS has had this since iOS 14, although it is still nice to see it finally coming to the iPad, as usual, 1 year late. Now despite this, there are still some new changes coming to iPadOS 15. This includes some new features in multitasking, including split view. In split view, you can still have your regular 2 apps open and work on both of them at the same time, but now, if one app has a third window that can be opened, you can take that third window, place it in the middle of both of them, and interact with it while not leaving your current split view, which is pretty cool. And when you're done with that window, you can actually swipe it down and add it to a new thing that Apple is calling the shelf. And it's pretty similar to the shelf that you have in macOS. Basically, you can take any window from an app, let's say you have an app in split view, and you can take that whole split view section and just kind of put it into the shelf, and it will stay there. You can switch to a different app, put another split view section into a shelf, and you can have multiple split view sessions open at once, all on the shelf, which is pretty cool. So those are the new changes coming to multitasking in iPadOS 15. Apple is also introducing a new app to both iPadOS 15 and macOS Monterey called Swift Playgrounds. Now, if you don't already know, Apple has their own programming language called Swift, and Swift Playgrounds will utilize this by allowing you to code and develop apps on your iPad. In fact, once you've developed an app in Swift Playgrounds, you can even submit it to the App Store, which is pretty cool. You can now go through the entire development process of making an app and getting it on the App Store all from an iPad. Something that was originally only something you could do on a computer can now be done from a tablet. I think that is pretty cool. And like I mentioned earlier, you can also do all of this on a Mac with macOS Monterey, as it'll also be available there. Now, along with this, it'll also provide coding lessons so people who don't know how to code can learn how to code on Swift Playgrounds, which is pretty cool. They have these really fun interactive lessons which will teach people how to code and develop their own app. Alright, so that's it for the iPadOS segment, but something is still missing from iPadOS. A very key and core element that you see in pretty much every device nowadays is still missing. What is it? Well, it's a stock calculator app. That's right, if you want to use a calculator on iPad, you still have to download a third-party app. That iOS calculator that you know and love is not available on the iPad. I don't really understand why, but it is pretty funny now that you can say that you can develop and submit an app on an iPad, but you can't do 2 plus 2. So, just something I thought I'd mention, but with that said, iPadOS is finally over. Let's move on to privacy. So Apple is making a couple changes to how they deal with privacy across their devices. This includes a toggle being introduced to the Mail app, which lets you decide whether you want senders to be able to track your IP address or your location when you open an email. Safari is making a very similar change where you can toggle whether or not you want a website that you're visiting to be able to take your IP address. Although in my opinion, the biggest change coming to privacy in iOS 15 is the addition of the App Privacy Report in Settings. In the App Privacy Report, you can see which apps are taking your personal info, such as microphone data, location, or your IP address, and you can toggle whether you want the app to continue doing it or just leave it as it is. Finally, the last change to privacy coming to iOS 15 is how Siri processes your data. Instead of your data being sent over the cloud to a computer somewhere else, all your data is processed on your device's neural engine. So your data, theoretically, is going to be more encrypted this way. It's not being sent to another computer somewhere else through the cloud. It's all being done on your device. So that's about it for privacy, and with that said, let's move on to watchOS. Apple has made a lot of new changes to the Apple Watch in watchOS 8. This includes the addition of the Mindfulness app, which is basically the breathing app and reflections put together into one app. In the Mindfulness app, you can take a breathing session, and then the Apple Watch will record it, and you can reflect on it later in the reflections area of the app. Apple has also made some new changes to the Sleep app, where now, in watchOS 8, you can track your respiratory rate while you're sleeping. Apple will provide you with detailed metrics of how your respiratory rate has changed over time, so you can see if something different is happening now versus what was happening a year ago in terms of how you're breathing while you're sleeping. Moving on to Apple Fitness Plus, Apple has added some new workouts including Tai Chi and Pilates type exercises. Apple is also introducing an Artist Spotlight series to Apple Fitness Plus, where you can do different workouts and listen to music from featured artists. Finally, Apple is adding portrait mode watch faces to watchOS 8. In watchOS 8, you can set a portrait mode photo as your watch face, and you can actually interact with the different layers of the photo, which I think is pretty cool. Oh, and one little side thing, Apple has finally integrated emojis, dictation speech, and the regular on-screen keyboard all into one view in watchOS 8, so you no longer have to swap between several different screens depending on whether you want to add some emojis, or you want to dictate something, or you just want to type something out on your on-screen keyboard. That's it for watchOS 8. Now let's move on to macOS Monterey. So remember how I said earlier that iPadOS, the new version of iPadOS, is often just taking iOS features from the previous year and then fitting them for the iPad? Well, this year, macOS is taking that to a whole new level with macOS Monterey. Now, I'm not disappointed with macOS Monterey, but after that new UI design we got with Big Sur, among many other things, I kinda was expecting a little bit more. Maybe just some simple changes, but something that does still make it stand out from previous versions of macOS, besides of course the new wallpaper. Fortunately this year we didn't really get that. Of course there are still some new features, but it does just seem to be taking a lot of iOS and iPadOS features, putting them into the Mac, and just making everything kind of work all in the ecosystem, which is great, to be fair. Glad that the ecosystem is getting stronger by the day, and that things just work better and better with each other. But I don't know, I still was kind of expecting just a little bit more innovation from the new installment of macOS. Despite this, I am still pretty excited about some of the new features coming to macOS Monterey. This includes the collection of features called Universal Control. Now you may remember Sidecar for the iPad. It basically allowed you to mirror your Mac's display and then control it from your Mac. So for example, it's basically like having a second display that you can carry around with you because it's an iPad. It's very portable. Sidecar is pretty cool, but Universal Control really takes that to a whole new level by allowing you to control multiple devices from one or vice versa. Apple showed a very good demonstration of this in the WWDC, where they actually showed how you can take a file you created in Procreate, drag it from your iPad across your MacBook and all the way to your iMac into your Final Cut composition, which is really cool. You can actually drag a file across 3 different computers using Universal Control. Essentially, Universal Control is just strengthening the Apple ecosystem by allowing you to control multiple devices as one. Now, a question for you, the viewer. Have you ever used Automator before on your Mac? You may notice that in your launcher, it looks like this, and basically what it does is it allows you to do very repetitive tasks all in one go by putting them into a program and then pressing play. Now, Automator is, I think, maybe the first of those kind of stock macOS other apps that you might notice in your launcher that are finally starting to get replaced by some more modern solutions. I honestly think a lot of these apps, like Automator, that are just kind of sitting there as stock macOS apps, often unused, are going to be phased out in the future by programs that are a bit more integrated and just a bit more modern than some of these apps that haven't been updated in a very long time. Now, although this doesn't directly relate to macOS, Safari is also having some new changes in macOS Monterey, iPadOS 15, and iOS 15. This includes the addition of tab groups, which basically allow you to take almost like a session, like let's say you have 15 tabs open, you can kind of like take a capture of that session, put it into a group, and store it somewhere else so you can open it up later. This way, you don't have a bunch of tabs open, and you can kind of like save a whole collection of tabs for an experience. Like let's say you're going hiking next Sunday, you can save a collection of tabs that tell you a bit more information about where you're going to be going, and you can put it into a tab group, name it, and save it for later. In general, Safari is getting a brand new UI change, and it's especially prevalent in iOS 15, where that little tab icon at the top that you're used to seeing where it shows what tab you're on, just kind of shows like the URL and everything at the very top, that's now being moved down to the bottom of the screen, and it'll be a little rounded icon. So they're kind of just redoing the whole UI, just making it a little more, I guess a little more future-proof, and just kind of adding some new features along with that to just redo Safari. Another thing being added to Safari are extensions. If you've ever used Google Chrome, you probably know and love extensions. Extensions like Grammarly and Honey make your web browsing experience just a little bit better. And extensions are finally coming to Safari. Many of the extensions that you recognize from Google Chrome will be added to Safari shortly, and you'll be able to enjoy all of those among all the other new features coming to the new Safari update. Now with that said, that is the end of my WWDC 2021 breakdown. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate all support on these videos, and I hope you continue to enjoy future videos.